The Castaway, the poem The Castaway by William Cowper. Okay, just reading it for you. Obscurest night involved the sky, the Atlantic billows roared. When such a distant wretch as I washed headlong from on board, of friends of hope of all bereft, his floating arm forever left. No braver child could Albion boast than he with whom he went, nor ever ship left Albion's coast with warmer wishes sent. He loved them both, but both in vain, nor him beheld, nor her again. Not long beneath the whelming brine, expert to swim he lay, nor soon he felt his strength decline, or courage die away, but waged with the death a lasting strife, supported by despair of life. He shouted, nor his friends had failed to check the vessel's course, but so the furious blast prevailed, that pitiless perforce they left their outcast mate behind and scudded still before the wind. Let me repeat that line. They left their outcast mate behind and scudded still before the wind. Some succor, yes, yet they could afford, and such as storms allow. The cask, the crew, the floated cart delayed not to bestow. But they knew nor ship nor shore whatever they gave should visit more. But they knew nor ship nor shore whatever they gave should visit more. Nor cruel as it seemed, could he their haste himself condemn, aware that flight in such a sea alone could rescue them. Yet bitter felt it still to die, deserted and his friends so nigh. Yet bitter felt it still to die, deserted and his friends so nigh. He long survives who lives an hour in ocean, self-appelled, and so long he, with unspent power, his destiny repelled, and ever, as the minutes flew, entreated help or cried adieu. Entreated help and cried adieu. At length, his transient respite past, his comrades who before had heard his voice in every blast could catch the sound no more. For then, by toil subdued, he drank the stifling wave, and then he sank. No poet wept him. See, please listen. No poet wept him, but the page of narrative sincere. I am emphasizing certain lines for your taking care of them, or those to understand it more thoroughly. Well, we are not going to describe the poem at all. This is just about a deconstructive reading. We are taking here from the points from here and there. The traditional analysis of the poem, you please don't expect in this case at all. This lengthier poem, I am not supposed to teach you as part of a reading of the poem in deconstruction or with the deconstruction techniques. No poet wept him, but the page of narrative sincere that tells his name, his birth, his age, is wet with ancient tear. and tears by birds or heroes shed alike immortalize the dead. Immortalize the dead. I therefore purpose not or dream, descanting on his fate, to give the melancholy theme a more enduring date, but misery still delights to trace its semblance in another's case. Its semblance in another's case. No voice divined the storm, elate, no light propitious shone, when snatched from all effectual aid. We perished each alone. We perished each alone, but I beneath a rougher sea and whelmed in deeper gulfs than he. This is the poem, The Castaway by William Cowper. But this is not just about the poem. What do you mean by castaway? Let us have a brief idea about the poem. The castaway, in this case here, it means he is the victim of a shipwreck. At a basic level, you can see that as the title says, it is the castaway. He is thrown overboard the ship out of some calamities, expected or unexpected. You know, the risk of going in ship, and the probable climatic changes, whatever it may be, this person, the speaker, is assumed to be a castaway. He is thrown overboard this ship. But that is not just our matter of concern. We are going to deal with this poem. We are going to deconstruct, we are going to see the deconstructive part of this poem, how we can deconstruct this poem apart from what you get at the surface level. That's what we normally do, you know. We do normally when you take a deconstructive reading, you are not looking at the traditional reading at all. Fine. Yes. So we will see what happens with this case and how in this text we will get the analysis. The Castaway by William Cowper. Okay. The castaway. I will comment further on some of the characteristics listed on the post-structuralist side of the diagram. That is the castaway beginning theory text we will see as the appendix. It's additionally you are given the poem in the text itself. At the last page, in the last session, you can see this particular poem as well. Yeah, a well-known poem by the 18th century poet William Cowper. He is the writer of the poem, the poet. As all critics recognize, this poem works at two levels. This poem works at two levels. On the surface, if you talk about a poem, the working of any literary work at the surface of its readily available meaning, whatever, it is the exact traditional or already established readings, most probably. But let us see what happens or how he comments upon this. It is an account of the death of a man washed overboard from a ship. At the surface level, if you look at the poem, now you please try to recollect the points that I highlighted while reading, or I emphasized while reading. We perished. They all sailed away. Certain lines have been there which I read out with more emphasis, or which I read twice to make you aware of the importance, relevance of those words. At least when you look at the poem, when you read at a surface level, you can see how the certain words, certain points that are immediately connected with the title of the poem. That itself is the surface, the title, to look at the title and assume something. Okay, this poem may be talking about this. So the castaway, if you know the meaning of the term, you can definitely assume this may be something on this or that. So definitely at surface level, it's an account of the death of a man washed overboard from a ship, who speaks in his own voice. Definitely you can see his own voice speaking out. Okay, yes. Who speaks in his own voice and laments his fate. What do you mean by lamenting? Lamenting means you are not happy about what happens to you. So lamenting, you are complaining, you are making comments over the doom that befell you. That's what you mean by lamenting. So definitely this person is in a problem. He is a castaway. He is thrown overboard the ship. You get the idea? So definitely the poem looks like it is about the speaker. He is talking about or he is commenting upon his fate. The difficult time he is trying to talk about in this poem. Okay, yes. So at the deeper level, but the deconstructive, the post-structuralist concern is not at all about looking something from the surface level or looking at the surface level. So it's a deeper level. The poem is about Cowper's own fear of an isolation. His own fear of being isolated. Within his incipient mental breakdown. See, if you read this poem, if you see the title and read this just at the surface level, you will never feel that this has something to do with the Cowper, William Cowper, the person, the very poet. See, biographical criticism is not at all meant here. Deconstruction is actually against that. But even then, you can point out certain ideas, you can take certain ideas and try to connect those with this poem. Okay? Yeah, let us see. Incipient mental break. See, this person, if you check out his personal details at least, you can see some problems that is looming large in his mind. Yeah, I am mentally broken down. So, I will be isolated. Others will abandon me. These problems are there in him. Or this tension, these worries are in him already. And while writing the poem, this reading tries to look at those deeper level factors as well. We know how deconstructive reading can work at verbal level, textual level and linguistic level. Okay, so verbal level, it's a close reading. You are looking for contradictions and paradoxes. Textual reading is about overall view you are taking. It's not just one or two stanzas, but the whole poem. After reading the whole poem, you try to find out some viewpoint shifts and all. Here it is, if you want, you can take this to be a textual level analysis if you want to. That is, you are looking at the whole poem. It looks like a commentary upon the poet's views on a castaway person thrown overboard this ship. But beyond that, at a surface level, it can be a commentary upon or a lamenting upon the writers, the poets' own worries about incipient mental breakdown. You get the idea? Yes. So, deeper level also you have to check out if you are a deconstructive critic. If you are a deconstructive critic or if you are going to see the deconstructive reading of a text, this is not just the reading that you get just by reading, just by looking or reading just once or twice. No, you have to read it more than one or two, many. You have to read it number of times. Numerous times you have to read. You have to analyze just one stanza, and even you can. Even with that, you can find out some entirely different reading. Okay, yes. Now you see here, for the deconstructionist, firstly, exposing contradictions or paradoxes might involve showing that the feelings professed in a poem can be at odds with those expressed. So, if you want to point out some contradictions and paradoxes, definitely you have to point out show that what is expressed is not actually the say, or that is not the only thing that can be available. Something different may be there. If you look into details, if you go into details, you can see something more deeper than that. That is the way you expose contradictions or paradoxes. Surface level, you see something, if you do not think too much, you are satisfied with that. But that's not the only thing available. If you look into details, if you go into details, you can see something entirely different. Okay. Yeah. So might involve showing that the feelings professed in a poem can be at odds with with those expressed. You are writing something. At a surface level, you avail something, but that may be at odd with. What do you mean by at odd? Odd one out. Something entirely different. Something projecting from the plane. That is not fitting into the context. Some entirely different meaning that can be entirely different from what you think what you avail at a surface level. For instance, in The Castaway, the speaker says that he does not blame his shipmates for his plight, but even saying this raises the possibility that he does. See the contradiction? He says he does not blame his shipmates for his plight. Okay, they all sailed away, they saved themselves, they were concerned just about them. I don't complain, I don't have complaints. Oh, okay, fine. They all escaped, fine. I don't blame. Speaker says that he does not blame. But just saying this even makes the possibility, brings the possibility that he does. He has complaints. They all abandoned me. I am not happy about it. I wanted their helping hands. All these complaints are there. But he's just at the surface plane, it's a formality. He says, I don't have complaints, okay, let them escape thereon. But that is a high-tech contradiction. A heavy contradiction is already there in what he said. Sometimes I will get you an example, very funny example you can take. I'm not even worried about ghosts. I'm not even worried about ghosts. When you say so, in that itself, the implication is that it is something to be worried. Even then, I am staying away from worrying about it. That's all. That means you are already acknowledging that particular possibility of the ghost to exist. Or people are supposed to be worried, but I am far better courageous, so I am not worried about that. But you are acknowledging that particular existence, the possibility, without you are knowing that. It's a contradiction implied in that case. You get the idea? It's a contradiction. It's a heavy contradiction. In the same way, this person says, I don't have complaints, okay, let them go. But the implication is that number of complaints are already coming to the forefront. Even though he doesn't express it face to face, he has a lot of complaints about their sailing away, abandoning him. They didn't come for help. That's a complaint. But just by word, the verbal, this is the problem of language that is highlighted by deconstruction at every point of their discussion. They say that language, you tell something, you mean something entirely different. There is a letter on the desk. It can be there is a letter that is written by someone, or if I make the shape of a letter A, and place it on that desk, in speech you cannot identify. If it is in writing, it's fine. At least the chance to identify is far higher. but every time you cannot do that. This is the way, this itself is the way in which every time language may betray you. So deconstructive point of view is to, or deconstructionist task is to identify the chance of betrayal. How language can betray you. It's not a worthy medium to stick on, or it is not, you cannot trust this language 24/7. Okay, you are confident that you express something. You cannot insist on the other persons to take that meaning for granted. They can have their own readings. Cowper says that I don't have complaints. They all sailed away. They are my friends, okay, let them escape, I don't have complaints. But even making the particular statement itself implies that obviously they were supposed to help him. They were not supposed to sail away in that way. So definitely he is making complaint without complaining. His own verbal structure, his own wordings betray what he tries to point out, that he doesn't have complaints. No, he definitely does have complaints. That's the point. Okay, yes. Now, or with those expressions, raises the possibility that he does. Thus, at one point, he says that his friends did all they could to save him. Definitely, a shipwreck time, there is limit for people to help each other. At one point, he says, at one point of this poem, now you go back to the poem and read it again after my finishing of this lecturing. You please go back to the poem. At one point, he says that his friends did all they could to save him. But elsewhere, he implies that they desert him and hurry off to save themselves. How can it be possible? At one point, the beginning stanzas, he points out that his friends did all they could to save him. But the same person says at the next coming lines that they all sailed away. They didn't stay to save him. They all hurried off to save themselves. Look again at the poem to identify the points where these inferences might be drawn. These are certain inferences you can take, and you can identify the way in which how he contradicts, his own statements, his own arguments. That's why textual reading is at a great length in this poem. Mainly textual reading is working out in the case of this poem. Because to look at the whole poem and then reading it and to find out the contradictions, paradoxes will be more fruitful in the case of this poem. Okay, yes, just wait. So first analysis, the first points like all of them deserted him, that contradiction of saying that I don't have complaints can be taken as a verbal mode of analysis. You are looking for paradoxes and contradictions in the individual stanza or individual line. But look at the point which I am talking right now. That is about all of them sailed away and all. How we can locate that we will have a look at now. That is textual level, we will look for breaks, gaps, fissures, discontinuities, a way of implying that the text lacks unity and consistency. Can't you see that text lacking unity and continuity here? That is, at one point he says that my friends did all they could do to save me. But next point, in the same poem, he says that they all sailed away in a very selfish manner. It's problematic. It's very problematic. You get the idea? You get the idea? Because it's the same poem that tells at one point that some of them helped me. They did all they could do to save me. But now he says in the same poem, he says that oh, were all selfishly, were all selfish and sailed away. I am looking for the particular part in this text. Secondly, pointing to breaks, gaps, fissures, discontinuities is a way of implying that the text lacks unity and consistency of purpose. There may, for instance, be changes in tone, perspective, or point of view. In the Castaway, for instance, the text sometimes uses T and sometimes he. Sometimes uses he. The text sometimes uses he. I. That is while copying down the text, it is not a copy, read only one. I cannot change this. That is, the text sometimes uses I. You have to note down it to be I. Beginning theory text itself, you can look at, uses I and sometimes he for the man lost overboard. How can it be possible? If it is first person point of view, throughout the poem we expect that point of view. But sometimes it says like I perished, I lost, I am the victim of this shipwreck. And sometimes it uses he, as if the poet is talking about someone else. That is lacking unity. That's a very problematic lack of unity, and definitely a deconstructive reading can point it out. Please note down, it's not T uses I, it should be I, and sometimes he for the man lost overboard. Such a destined wretch as I. So it's a line from the poem. But his floating home forever left. It's my italics means it is italicized by the text writer of the text, that is beginning theory text, Peter Barry maybe. His floating home forever left. That means such a destined wretch as I. In the case of this man, I. That is, if William Cowper himself is the speaker, it's I. Everywhere it should be I. But at next lines, in the coming line, you can see his floating home. His floating home. His floating home. It is in italics in the text. That's why my italics it's given there. It's not me, but beginning theory, the text writer. Maybe he highlighted it in italics. How it can be he if the point of view of the poem is first person. First person, if it is first person, you are supposed to maintain that. That's all. That's the way we take it always, normally. But here you can see it to be something different. Look again at the poem and see if you can identify other examples of this. As I have already indicated, at one level, it is an imaginative retelling of the death of a sailor lost overboard during one of the expeditions of the explorer George Anson. Definitely you can see that name at one point in this poem. In one line, this poem, the name is mentioned, Anson, George Anson. Hope you can locate that later. Okay, I read it and again. Yeah, Anson's tear. Not in the last final stanza, but almost when the poem is nearing to its closure, you can see it is wet with Anson's tear. A person who wrote about some shipwreck and about the fate of a person thrown overboard. It's about a very outsider kind of narration. You could see in that case Anson is writing, that's about a sailor lost overboard during one of the expeditions of the explorer George Anson. If that is the case, Cowper's situations do not have anything to do with this poem. It's about another person's writing, and again even that person is writing about one another person. That's all. It doesn't have anything to do with Cowper, if you take that in that sense. Based on the account of the incident in Anson's published journals. At another level, if you take it at another level, This is merely a metaphor for the isolation and depression felt by Cowper himself. At another level, if you take the biographical details of Cowper, whether he was thrown overboard as a shipwreck at some point of his life, the answer may be no. So that this is just a metaphor how a person can be isolated. And this shipwreck and this person thrown overboard alone, abandoned by his friends, may be just a metaphor for what he is worried about, his own possible incipient mental breakdown and isolation being isolated by his friends and family members. But the relationship between these two levels is very unsettled. What's the reason? It's very unsettled because at one point he says it's I. That definitely means him, something to do with him or the speaker, directly pointing out to the writer. At the next level or in the next stanzas or certain other stanzas, he says it to be he, as if it is about some other person. It's unsettled. For instance, all the specific details about Tansen and his expedition distract from the generalized notion of loss, abandonment, and isolation. And we shift erratically from one to the other. That's the problem. There is no consistency. And the deconstructionist critic, the task is to find out these inconsistencies in the text. Okay. That means it's very unsettled. If you take this poem to be just a record, just a writing upon Anson's or writing based on Anson's recording of some shipwreck incidents, it doesn't have much to do with the sense of loss, abandonment, isolation. How Cowper is connected with that? No. Definitely many people lost their lives in the shipwreck and all. It doesn't have much to do with the Cowper's own feelings of isolation and all. That's why, but at some point you see it to be I perished, we perished. First person point of view. It's a erratically we are shifting from one to another because of the inconsistency in the point of view of the poem. Personal point of view, first person, then third person, coming back to first person. It's very difficult for you to maintain the sense, where to fix down the details, the theme, how to fix down the theme. You are worried or it's unsettled. Okay? Yes. Next. Thirdly, actually it's the next paragraph in the, so I forgot to cut the paragraph wise. Okay, it's fine. Thirdly, the linguistic quirks which seem relevant include several kinds of linguistic oddity or non sequitur of the kind which undermines secure meanings. The linguistic quirks that also bring problem while undermining secure meanings. When you write down for the exam, please note down all these things you don't have to mess up with. The linguistic quirks in the poems sometimes undermines, make it difficult for you to reach in secure meanings. That is the idea given here. Certain linguistic quirks. If you can't connect all these ideas all together, like seem relevant, include the several kinds of linguistic oddity. These linguistic oddities, some projections which do not fit. Okay, and they make it difficult for us to reach into secure meanings. Is it about Cowper's on problems, worries, tensions, or is it just about Anson's recording, or is it just something based upon Anson's recording, which do not have anything to do with the recordings, which do not have anything to do with this Cowper's tensions, worries in his personal life? We don't know, because sometimes it is I, sometimes it is he. How can we settle down the meaning or analysis, the point of view? We don't know, right? That's the way this part is analyzed. Then There are many of these in the castaway. There are many of these in the castaway, means such oddities, linguistic quirks. In the final stanza, let us take one by one. In the castaway, the final stanza, the poet says that no divine assistance came when we perished each alone. When we perished each alone. Let me take the text and see the particular part. He says, my italics again, right? You can see there. We should be highlighted. We perished each alone. How can it be possible? He says, final stanza. In the final stanza, he says, no divine assistance came when we perished each alone. Please note down, we perished each alone. That is the point. We, that subject is highlighted in italics in the text. Yes, it is a soft copy, you cannot see it here, but the poem has shown the death of only one person. That is another problem, another linguistic quirk. Why? It shows the death of only one person. But at one point he says, we perished each alone. Many of them, as if many of them lost their lives. That is another inconsistency. Sometimes I will tell you about some possibilities where you make such linguistic quirks. Why didn't you tell me while you took the candid? Why didn't you tell me when you took the candid? Just think. I will sing this group song alone. I will sing group song, even the group song alone. Sangaganam vare njan ottakku paadum. How does that comic effect you get there? How do you get that comic effect here? How do you bring that comic effect? Because it is linguistically, it's not matching, it's contradictory. It's a linguistic quirk. So because we have a notion, it's a group song, for that there should be more than one person. Candid is supposed to be something taken without your knowledge, without your awareness. That's how it, in that case only it becomes a candid. But you're complaining that, why didn't you inform me while you took the candid? So that's the way you have these linguistic quirks. These are funny examples from our daily life. And how it is there in this these are there in this poem as well, and how this becomes very difficult for us to settle down or to make it more consistent in the case of such cases, such points. Because the poem as a whole, it's a castaway. It's not a plural term. The castaway talks about the death of only one person. But at the final stanza, you say, we perished each alone. We perished. How can it be possible? The same effect as you talk about group song to be sung by one. Okay. Yeah, the term aporia. Next is the term aporia. Aporia is not a new term for you. We discussed it even before. Aporia is a tangled knot. It's a very difficult path to cross. Finally, the term aporia finally is the popular one in deconstructive criticism. Wherever you come across aporia, something you find it difficult to decipher meaning of something, there is an aporia, a path which you cannot cross, you cannot pass at ease. That's what I mean by aporia. Finally, it's a popular one in deconstructive criticism. It literally means an impasse. That means impasse means it's difficult for you to cross. It's not as you walk straight on a straight road. You have difficulties on road of reading the poem. That's how it is highly connected with the deconstructive process. And designates a knot, K-N-O-T knot. What do you mean K-N-O-T knot? It's a kind of sometimes you have twain, knot with the twain. You cannot always untie it easily. Tangled knot, K-N-O-T, knot. In the text, it's a knot, K-N-O-T, knot in the text which cannot be unraveled or solved because it is said is self-contradictory. The problem is it's self-contradictory. Today I tell you to submit the note for assignment. Next day I tell that, no, I will not take that. Why should I take your notes as assignments? You have to submit something different. You have to make some papers, you have to write down it in papers and you have to submit that. Next day I again say you, no, it's okay, fine, you submit your notes. Then what happens there? I am contradicting myself so that the persons who are immediately connected with them find it very difficult to decipher the meaning. What does she mean? What should I do in that case? Should I submit note? Should I submit paper length assignment? Or should I submit both together? This is the problem. For you are contradicting yourself. The same difficulty we come across if you are reading a poem with such tangled knots, such aporias in your reading, in the text at your hand. Then, so self-contradictory. The problem with being self-contradictory, I told you already. It perhaps corresponds, therefore, to what the British critic William Empson, in his book 7 Types of Ambiguity, should be in italics. It's a name of a text length publication, book length publication, so should be in italics. Sorry for that. It's not there. Then designated as the 7th type of verbal difficulty in literature. 7 types of ambiguity. Ambiguity, the confusion that you come across in your readings, writings, that's it, interpretation. So this can be taken as the 7th type, this verbal difficulty, namely that which occurs when there is an irreconcilable conflict of meaning within the text. It looks like saying something, and then if you read it more carefully, you feel like, no, it says something different. Again, in the next stanza, you feel like, oh, okay, this is as you read in the first, as you read at the first time. Again, coming back to this contradiction. So this is very difficult for you to decipher meanings in that case. Irreconcilable conflict. What do you mean by irreconcilable? What do you mean by irreconcilable conflicts? Cannot be conciled. What do you mean by reconciliation and all you talk about? So irreconcilable means you cannot untie the knot. You cannot solve the problem of meaning within the text. For instance, at the start of the 3rd stanza, we are told of the drowned man that no poet wept him. Another difficulty, another problem, another contradiction. What is it? In the beginning, it is told no poet wept him. Then what is this poem? Then what about the existence of this poem? The same thing we came across in the first analysis. Refusal to mourn the death of the child. Then what does he do throughout the poem? The very existence of the poem is the mourning. If you take it in that right sense, in that sense. Not in the right sense, but in that sense. Here again, no poet wept him. He says that no poet wept him. So what does he do? He is obviously a poet. To write the poem, obviously he is a poet. So definitely the existence of this poem is a weeping over the death of this person. Where we are reading contradicts this. There seems to be no way out of this bind. It's a bind. It's a kind of tangled knot. It's often said that Roland Barthes, in the essay The Death of the Author in 1968, not unfamiliar to you, marks the transition from structuralism to post-structuralism, and in that essay, Barthes says that in the text, everything must be disentangled. In the text, everything must be disentangled, nothing deciphered. We are not supposed to decipher the text and close it down peacefully. You can disentangle text. disentangle every problem, every aporia, every contradiction. You can definitely try to find out new contradictions, new shift and breaks and all those. But that ultimate aim is never about deciphering the text. You are not going to make it unified and keep it on your table. Yeah, I read it completely, I understood it completely well, so it's over. No text ends in that way. It's a textuality. It's a meaning potential of the text. That's why deconstruction talks about moving from work to text. Work is completely the possession of a particular person. A text is something open for discussion. You get the idea? Yes. Then, the aporia, though, is a textual knot which resists disentanglement, and several of the elements discussed above as contradictions, paradoxes, or shifts might equally be classified under the more general heading of aporia. General heading can be aporia, but as you have three different stages for a deconstruction process, you make it in that way. Otherwise, you can categorize all these problems, all these tangled knots you come across while reading a text under the umbrella term aporia. Okay, while it is easy to see why this process might be called reading against the grain, it is misleading to suggest that the poem has an obvious grain. Another difficulty. Even the very definition of deconstruction is at stake in that case. You can match this particular point with what I said about the existence of ghost. I am not even worried about the ghost. That means you are implying, unconsciously you are implying that ghost is something to be worried about. Okay, so this is the way as it says, it is a reading against the grain. When you say that, definitely you are acknowledging that this poem has a definite grain. Grain means that crux, the real meaning. Is it there? Deconstruction erases all such possibilities. Different readings are there. There is no one unified meaning. So what about this grain? In that case, even that is the contradictory. Every point, whenever you utter language, you can find out such contradictions. We do not note it down usually. That's the only difference. Okay, the idea? Yes. And grain, so that is, it's misleading to suggest the poem has an obvious grain or overt meaning which the critic has merely to routinely counteract. Is it so? No. Deconstruction doesn't look at the meaning of the poem. That's why I didn't get you the analysis of this poem or the other one. Why should we do that? To analyze the poem, to read the poem and tell that this poem talks about this or that, this is the surface. That is a surface level reading that we get. We are not concerned about that at all. We are not supposed to be concerned about that at all, because my reading is not your reading. Your reading is not that what you are going to get in Peterbury. This deconstructive reading can be like this. Another person, when he or she takes it for deconstruction, can be something entirely different. Okay, yes, so that is again the contradiction. If you talk reading this poem will also have shown, I hope that structuralist and post-structuralist reading practices are much at odds with each other. Structuralist reading is cannot be the same with the post-structuralist reading. Much at odds with each other. Identifying patterns and symmetries in the structuralist manner discovers a unified text. Mainly their aims are entirely different. They will never try to project the disunities in the text. Who? Structuralists. You know how much they would like to highlight the reliability of language. But deconstruction is not for that. They do not want to. They want to say that the text is disunified. It's not a unified entity at all. So, man discovers a unified text which is to which is, so to speak, happy with itself, whereas reading the text against itself produces a sense of disunity of a text engaged in a civil war with itself. What do you mean by civil war with itself? It's not with, between other nation. It's a civil war means inside the nation you are not happy with some of the decisions, the rules of its own government, or even between states. We see civil war. It's inside out. It's inside. So the text is not at all a unified entity. Deconstruction tries to project that. While structuralism, they would like to make sure that the text is unified and you have to be very peaceful about the readings, interpretations, whatever available. But deconstruction tries to point out find out every contradiction, every fissure, gap, inconsistency with the aim that, or to show that the text is not a unified self at all. The text is engaged in a civil war with itself. That's why we took the example of that people with multiple personality disorder. We are supposed to point it out. Definitely the doctor's interruption had been there, or they had to find out that this person is not the other person. You might have watched in those movies. So this is the way deconstruction, some people will have to point out, yeah, this is not the reading of this text, or this is not the only reading of this text. And that's all with the deconstruction. Thank you so much for listening.